Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Telemedia Magazine podcast with me, Jarvis Todd, publisher, and my old mate Paul Skeldon, the editor-in-chief. This is where we spend a quick 5 minutes running through some of the most interesting stories that have come across the news desk and some of the things that we think are really important for you out there in the telemedia world. And the things that you should be aware of. This episode, we're going to be talking about identity and the race to keep everyone safe online, which is obviously one of the most important aspects of any successful telemedia industry, any telemedia service. Um, as everyone will be aware, digital identity checks have been exploding, and the news story that we're covering highlights that we're up to about 175 billion annually, and that's being primarily driven by things that everyone will be aware of: biometrics, network APIs, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. Um, and at the same time, this is a real opportunity for the MVNOs, and we're going to be looking at a company called Rebel Telecom, who have quite an interesting take on mobile safety. And this is again particularly pertinent because they've got a child first ecosystem that they're pushing out, and we think that together with the sort of trends this is a trend really which starts to show telcos not just being the guys that are carrying the traffic, but also now controlling the access. And we've talked about the role of the telco many times over the last couple of years, not least in the way in terms of payments and banking, and they've sort of been terribly bad at that side of things in the past. So I think this is a really interesting development and one that we thought would be worth diving into a little bit more in a little bit more detail. So, as I say, on telemediamagazine.com, you'll find the story Biometrics and Network API converge as digital identity checks head towards 175 billion. So, Paul, you picked this one
Mm.
out. As I said, massive issue, really, in terms of the industry. What's your take on it?
Well, I think it's all part of a bigger sort of move towards sort of online safety and anti-fraud and all that. I think it's all starting to sort of coalesce into sort of one big problem slash solution. Um, the research from Juniper sort of points to the sort of fact that sort of biometric and network intelligence and automated authentication and orchestrating all that is replacing passwords and static document checks and things like that for access to pretty much everything. Um, as you say, like the headline says, there'll be around 175 billion of these sort of verifications carried out annually. So it's big, and it sort of is, as I say, this move away from passwords. What's interesting about it is it's largely being fueled by the massive and very rapid rise in AI fraud. I think sort of businesses are very much sort of driving this because they don't want the AI fraudulent traffic. AI is sort of replicating being a person, it's replicating being another business, it's faking sort of, payments, it's faking chargebacks. We talked in a previous podcast about the sort of chargebacks and how Visa and MasterCard have changed all their rules around how they manage that. It's a big problem. And I think coming from a sort of different angle at it at the same time is this idea that there's a growing sort of movement to try and protect people from the horrible stuff that's on the internet, particularly people who are under 16. Um, though personally, I'd sort of argue that if it's like too horrible for people under 16, it's probably too horrible for everybody. So maybe
Yeah.
this is a more of a
Go for it.
universal thing. But the UK is banning social media access for under 16s. That's already happened in Australia. A story I wrote about that got some feedback from various people around the world. It's happening in some MENA regions as well. It's being talked about in a lot of other countries. So there's that side of it. We're trying to protect kids. We're trying to protect business. Fraud, chargebacks, nasty content, all that kind of stuff is just rampant. The whole sort of internet is just a mess and a horrible place. And all this is sort of going on, but it does throw up a sort of opportunity for telcos in particular to be the sort of gatekeeper, the bouncer of of access. So it's not just about providing pipes and the services. It can be about them helping to protect people, and that's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for them. I think there's some spin-offs for the telemedia side as well, where these
But
kind
yeah,
of
I mean, well,
services.
we always talk about fraud, and there's been quite a lot of moves in recently with we mentioned with Visa and Mastercard, for example, putting the onus on the merchants to start preempting problems rather than reacting to problems. Otherwise, they're going to be out of business. And I think that sort of general trend towards talking about it, the importance of operating a business using clean traffic and verified
Mm.
customers is becoming it's non-negotiable, right? And one of the sort of opportunities, if you like, is if those compliant businesses are embracing that, and if the infrastructure behind it, the payments and now the network infrastructure behind it, are actually, rather than it being a restriction, is really going to mean that you've got safer onboarding, fewer losses as a result of fraud, and basically higher levels of trust, then you've got a successful business. So
Yeah.
yeah, in the past, I guess, we'd have been looking at this as, oh, it's another obstacle. But I think, as you say, when you paint the picture of where we are in terms of the online world, in order to operate in that world safely without being put out of business by a government or a telco or whatever, these sorts of developments, I think, are actually pretty positive news rather than being problems.
Oh, definitely. And I think, like, I mean, you're right. You don't want to be put out of business by sort of government and regulation and that. I think equally, people don't want to be put out of business by like a massive AI fraud deluge, which is, hitting them from the other side. So, yeah, I mean, everyone involved in this has a vested interest in embracing it and making it work. I think if it's done correctly, becomes a much slicker and easier way to get online. An example is the sort of cookies pop up. No, it's not sort of a security thing, but it sort of is because it's about privacy and GDPR. Like every website you go to, you get the thing popping up going, "Do you want to accept cookies?" It's the most sort of unuser friendly thing. This kind of identity checking needs to be made more seamless and more smooth, I think, and that's why biometrics is quite a useful way. I mean, anyone who's got an iPhone, it will open when you look at it, or when you touch it with your thumbprint and things like that. It's easy, so it needs to embrace all of that. But it is an essential. And as I say, I think it is an opportunity. And another story that I think is related in a kind of way is this thing about Rebel Telecom and
Yeah,
MVNO that it's hot. MVNOs largely have to have a sort of USP. They have to target a particular thing and be the sort of carrier of choice if you want to do X, Y, and Z. It's getting more and more granular. But this one's particularly interesting because it's aimed at kids. And it's something like 94% of secondary school children have a mobile phone. Many of them are under 16, so they're going to be banned from social media and all the rest of it, but there's ways around it. This Rebel Telecom thing is set up so that it's built from the ground up that it doesn't have social media, it doesn't have unlimited web browsing, it's all just built into the experience. So you give it to a kid when they're 12, they don't really know that that's not the sort of full experience, and they just grow up with that. It also has much more subtle and built-in parental controls and all sorts of things like that. And I just thought it was a really interesting idea that someone's built an MVNO around servicing young people who are new to the sort of mobile world and trying to
sure.
do it safely.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
really smart, isn't it? It's a really
yeah.
smart idea. I mean, my mind immediately thought to what would be the opposite of Rebel Telecom. Is there going to be, the sort of telecom, or I don't know, But yeah, I mean, I think given the complexities of from a user point of view, from a parent who has a user, having somebody that is effectively taking that all of those issues away, and is an effective gatekeeper for
Mm,
accessing content is important. And again, I don't see restrictions being bad things in this particular case, because obviously there are still they would still be able to for example, authorize child-friendly apps or services or games and all
mm,
those sorts of things. They're not going to do that without allowing, content that is appropriate for the user.
mm,
And obviously, the parents will be able to authenticate payments or authorize payments as a result. But I think it's a very good way of segmenting that market, because we know from years back that selling 18 plus content to minors is not a very smart way to run your business. And yeah, I thought it was an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think it also protects the sort of content and service providers, doesn't it? Because it means that they can more precisely target the appropriate stuff at these people as well. So it's sort of, you can have as an under 16, you can have an experience of all of the stuff. It's just safer. You get games, you get content, you get whatever, but it's tailored to it just makes it better for everybody, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, sure, exactly. And then, and as I say, if you are working with the operator and you've got the SIM identified, you've got the number verified, you've got the age verified, the result is that you get frictionless, secure onboarding of a person that has
Yeah.
been correctly verified at the, for whatever service that you're targeting at that particular group. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it feels like here's another opportunity for the MNOs and the MVNOs to finally, you know, provide some real value and become an even more important part of the puzzle. I wonder, however, whether or not this would maybe by adding this level of functionality and importance, it might justify them taking a bigger margin for their services, but which is traditionally what they've always done. So, yeah, I think that's one to watch, and certainly again, for anyone. Have you got anything to add to that, Paul?
Well, I was just going to say, I think in sort of the broader MVNO sort of market, I think it's interesting that they've found a particular niche and are going after it. I think sort of fair play to them that they're doing something that's kind of, for the good of mankind. But I think it also just demonstrates that sort of the MVNO model is one that's really flexible and can be used for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see more of that kind of stuff. I think we're going to see more sort of brands tying up with MVNOs and you're gonna you have your Gucci mobile service or whatever it might be. So I think it is an example, a great example of that the MVNO model can deliver all sorts of things. I think it also, in this particular case, makes the world a safer place, and that creates opportunities, which is
Mm.
what we're all about.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if you are interested in improving sort of your customer identity journey or online safety or anti-fraud, security, all of these issues are going to be front and center at the upcoming Telemedia Marbella event. Which is happening on the 4th to the 6th of October. You should just visit wtevent.com for all the information you need, and you can sign up immediately. And I think if you do it before, if you're watching this before the 31st of July, you can get a super cheap early bird price. And again, just to remind everyone that all of the stories that we've talked about in this podcast and many, many more can be found on the telemediamagazine.com website, where you can see what Paul actually does with his days. So we hope you pay a regular visit to the website, and we hope that we'll see you back here again for our next podcast in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, Paul, thank you very much, mate.
Always a pleasure.
And I think have a happy summer.
You too, and everyone else.
Take care, everyone. Thank you very much for watching.
Bye.